When a millionaire's bet went awry, fix this engine and he'll reveal his entire salary. Jake stood in the dimly lit shop, surrounded by the comforting scent of motor oil and grease, the only remnants of his grandfather's legacy flickering like a distant memory. As a child, he was enthralled by the sound of engines roaring to life under his grandpa's skilled hands. Yet at 32, he felt like a ghost in the very place that once pulsed with life. The shop was struggling, and so was he. The pressure of financial strain gnawed at him, replacing parts, failed repairs, living paycheck to paycheck. Every day, the doubt etched a little deeper into his mind, whispering that maybe this wasn't meant for him, that perhaps he was unworthy of the title mechanic. Just when Jake thought he couldn't sink lower, Ethan strolled in, a man so sharply dressed he seemed to slice through the remnants of Jake's nostalgia. With a flashy grin, he waved his designer sleeve and made the bet that would echo through the town. Jake could fix an old rusted engine he inherited from his grandfather, or Ethan would reveal his entire salary. The audacity! A hush fell over the shop as townsfolk gathered, gossiping, smirking, and prodding at Jake like vultures. Hatred simmered deep within him, mixing with a paralyzing fear of failure. First thoughts merged into an overwhelming torrent. How could he possibly measure up to Ethan's expectations? Could he silence the collective laughter swirling around him? The pressure tightened like a vice around his chest. Image after image of neglect raced through his mind, of missed opportunities and a legacy seemingly wasted. Each rusted component of the engine felt like a representation of himself, forgotten, overlooked, and abandoned. He hesitated, and in that moment frustration bubbled up, threatening to spill over. Jake clenched his jaw, muscles tensing as whispers of doubt flickered at the edges of his resolve. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. With Ethan's laughter still ringing in his ears, Jake dove into the project, working late into the evenings. He stripped down the engine, each turn of the wrench an attempt to peel back the layers of self-doubt that clung to him like a heavy fog. Yet just when he began to feel the warm trickle of confidence emerge, sabotage loomed in the form of Ethan's wealthy friends, each attempt a brutal reminder of the social gulf between them. Day after day, lithographed with judgment and disbelief, the community's voices grew louder, the relentless dichotomy of merit versus money coalescing into a singular heartbeat of anxiety that thudded painfully against his skull. The pressure mounted as Jake stood in front of the diner, tension in the air palpable, eyes bouncing from faces filled with skepticism to glares filled with expectation. They awaited a showdown, a proclamation of victory or defeat. Inside, he wrestled not only with the engine, but with everything inside him. The faint echo of his grandfather's faith and hard work battled against his own crippling sense of worthlessness. As he faced the townspeople, a singular thought pierced through him. It was never about winning the bet. It was about reclaiming his pride, wrapped in the pride of those who came before him. Twists of regret blended with iron resolve, yet at that moment he felt utterly uncertain. Would he be able to rise from the shadow cast by wealth and reputation? A final bolt awaited his careful touch, but as he reached out, hands trembling, Jake knew the stakes were higher than he ever imagined. This time, it was about more than machines. It was about defining who he truly was under the layers of fears that bound him. Jake felt the heaviness of the air pressing against him, thick with expectation and the whispered doubts of the crowd. He couldn't afford to fail, not this time. He could almost hear the faint ringing of his grandfather's voice, urging him forward, echoing the same lessons of perseverance and grit he once learned as a child. But now, in this crucible of public scrutiny, there was more at stake than just pride. There was a chance to reclaim his identity, buried beneath layers of fear and self-doubt. Taking a deep breath, Jake shifted his focus back to the old engine before him. Every intricate component sparked memories of his childhood. Working alongside his grandfather, he had once been filled with dreams, eyes bright with ambition. Yet those dreams faded into the background of adult struggles, overshadowed by bills and failures. As he re-examined the engine, he pushed back against nostalgic sorrow and instead sought clarity. This restoration became a metaphor for his life, a chance not only to fix an inanimate machine, but to mend his own fraying spirit. With each turn of the wrench, he consciously dismissed the voices of mockery that seeped into his consciousness. "You don't belong here," they taunted. But those words were laced with the bitterness of envy, veiled in the guise of concern. Jake willed himself to visualize his hands unearthing his capabilities, honing in on the knowledge gifted to him through experience. Discarding fear, he embraced an understanding of the engine that was deeper than mechanics. It was rooted in his lineage, a bond of trust and dedication passed down to him.
As hours melted into each other, Jake's rhythm gained momentum, pulsating like a heartbeat, reinvigorating the very air he breathed. He embraced the challenge, pulling together threads of determination woven into his fabric. The whispers transformed into echoes of encouragement. Voices from the past mingled with his own emerging resolve, a siren call that ignited something within him. Suddenly, the engine was no longer a reminder of limitations, but a vessel of potential. Each bolt tightened became a statement of self-affirmation. Just as he began to appreciate this emerging strength, a flicker of doubt crept back in, insidious and undeniable. What if everything he achieved during this relentless effort amounted to nothing? As he attached the final piece of the connection, his heart raced. Could he truly wake up the dormant engine and prove to Ethan and the crowd that he wasn't merely a struggling mechanic, but a worthier successor to his grandfather's legacy? Taking a step back, he wiped the sweat from his brow and surveyed his handiwork. The rust was still visible, marring the surface, yet the engine stood defiant, a reminder that beauty exists within flaws. Jake exhaled slowly, the fog of uncertainty lifting slightly. He thought back to the moment when he had clenched the first tool, hesitant yet determined. There was no way to go back, only the paths leading forward, sculpted by the choices he was about to make. With a newfound clarity, he reached for the ignition. The crowd's anticipation felt palpable, a wave of collective breath held in suspense. Jake's palms were slick with sweat, reminiscent of the times he had tightened wrenches and adjusted gears while his grandfather stood beside him. It had always been about diligence, an unwavering faith in hard work, a lesson he was ready to embrace fully. The time had come to face not just the engine, but the kaleidoscope of his own fears. He turned the key, with every ounce of his being urging the start. Nothing turned. He hesitated, panic clawing at his insides. But then he steadied himself, focusing on the basics. Diagnose, recalibrate, make adjustments. As he manipulated the wires and twisted the valves, he could feel the stirrings of tenacity creeping back. Perhaps fixing the engine mirrored his own journey of self-restoration. He pushed forward, compelled by the pursuit of authenticity. With one last effort, he ignited the key again, more fervently this time, and finally, glorious rumblings filled the air. The old engine coughed to life, roaring in defiance, choking out the dust of its past, like a phoenix rising from ashes. The crowd erupted into gasps and cheers. Yet the most profound realization struck him. Not just the engine, but the machine he was rebuilding within himself echoed that moment of triumph. But even as he relished the first inklings of victory, a shadow of doubt loomed. Ethan would not take this defeat lightly. The looming confrontation shifted focus. The bet was no longer incidental. It bore witness to both personal victory and the threats of annihilation from within his own history. Jake swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. Whatever came next would test the very limits of his resolve. The stakes were higher than he anticipated, and as Ethan stepped forward, a dangerous glint in his eye, Jake knew the time had come to confront not just an opponent, but the demons festering within him. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he met Ethan's icy gaze, a mix of bravado and underlying menace that nearly sucked the air from the space around them. The crowd's cheers faded into an anxious murmur, voices blending into a cacophony of uncertainty. The satisfaction of the engine's revival momentarily dulled by the task looming ahead. This confrontation with Ethan was more than mere competition. It was a challenge that threatened to unravel the progress he'd made. "You think that's enough to impress me?" Ethan's voice dripped with condescension. "I'll give you one more chance. Repair another car,
a more difficult one, and I'll show you what real success looks like. There it was, his provocation. This was not just about proving his mechanical skills, but a direct assault on his worth as a person. "You'll see what I can do," Jake replied, the determination igniting a flicker in his chest despite the fear. It was as if his words were not simply a promise, but an invocation, a statement that could either be his foundation or lead to his downfall. The crowd shifted, energy crackling in the air as they awaited Jake's response. He could feel their stares, their hopes tied to him, yet the weight of those expectations felt like shackles. What if he failed again? An icy surge coursed through him. Failure wasn't just what he feared, it was the return of that insidious self-doubt, a dark companion of unfulfilled dreams and regrets. Jake's mind raced. The mechanics of fear and ambition tangled within him. Each imagined misstep morphed into an echo of his past, another moment when he had let himself down. He shook his head, trying to clear the cobwebs. That wasn't who he was anymore, and the shadow of his former self would not dictate his choices. This moment could either be an affirmation of his new strength or a bitter retreat into the shadows. Taking a breath, he stepped forward, driven by a new sense of purpose. What car? His voice was steadier than he felt, but within him a storm brewed, equally matched with determination. Ethan smirked. "Outback, that old Chevy looks like a disaster waiting to happen. You've got 24 hours. As Ethan turned to walk away, Jake could feel the weight shift again. He glanced behind him at the assembled crowd, searching for familiar faces. Each expression spoke volumes, support mixed with caution.
But above it all stood the unwavering belief that had awakened within him, like the engine he had just revived. He gripped the sides of the workbench, grounding himself. "I won't just fix it. I'll restore it to its former glory." Fear may have been lurking, but passion and resolve sparkled in its absence. Jake made his way to the Chevy, legs carrying him towards it almost involuntarily. The sight of the rusted frame and broken components tightened his chest, yet he felt an inexplicable pang of connection. This car had a story, much like his own, filled with wear and tear, but not beyond redemption. He set to work immediately, his hands moving with the rhythmic fluidity of muscle memory. As he stripped down the layers of neglect, images of his grandfather flickered in his mind like the fading light of dusk, imparting words of inspiration. A gentle map of wisdom woven into his fabric through years of shared labor and love emerged, guiding him through the chaos. With every nut and bolt he extracted, Jake unearthed more than just components. He excavated his self-worth. The engine was a reflection of his life, and he surveyed the brokenness with intention rather than disdain. He would repair each fracture, every piece of debris that had accumulated over time. This wasn't just fixing a car, it was cementing his resilience. As the hours slipped by, sweat mingled with determination. The Shelley and Jake were intertwined, each revival echoing with the other's progress. Just as he tightened a crucial bolt, doubt returned, demanding a seat at his table again. What if it doesn't matter? What if you're destined to fail? His fists clenched reflexively, but in doing so, he silenced that whisper. He was no longer that lost boy, drifting among shadows. This time, he wasn't just rebuilding something outside of himself. He was constructing a foundation of understanding, skill, and resilience. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over his trials, and with the last gleam of daylight, Jake felt his hands ache, not just with effort, but with triumph. He stepped back, examining what he had uncovered, emotions swirling like the remnants of dust in the still air. Yet something nagged at the edges of his consciousness, a memory of Ethan's derisive smirk, the threat to his journey looming like a storm cloud. He needed to finish strong. He needed to prove to himself that success didn't just live in victory against an adversary. He turned back to the Chevy, heart heavy with both excitement and trepidation. How much farther could he push himself? As he readied to make final adjustments, he caught a hint of movement in the corner of his eye and turned to see Ethan watching, calculating. The challenge wasn't just mechanical, it was also psychological. And there lay the real test. Would this challenge break him or forge a new identity? Jake wasn't sure yet. All he knew was that the moment of truth was inching ever closer.
Jake pulled up a stool and sat inches away from the Chevy, its battered frame looming like an ominous specter. The sight of the dilapidated vehicle ignited a fierce sense of purpose deep within him. He was confronted not just by rust and disrepair, but by the culmination of every obstacle he'd fought against, the self-doubt, the fears of inadequacy, and the unrelenting shadows of his past. His hands, trembling with anticipation and need, traced the jagged contours of the engine. The multi-layered challenge ignited a spark of creativity in him. This was not merely about mending metal, it was an artistic endeavor requiring intricate thinking. Jake envisioned a reconstructed story, one defined by revival and triumph, and he allowed that vision to guide his movements. With each bolt he removed, Jake embraced a meticulousness he hadn't fully recognized until now. He considered not just how to fix it, but how to do it right. The mechanics were straightforward, yet his approach became reflective. Each decision echoed through his thoughts, making him confront his past failures head-on. The noise of fear attempted to intrude, but he held fast. "You'll never be good enough," a voice whispered from the back of his mind. He could feel his heart racing at the thought. It pulsed in rhythm with the hammering sounds of his tools. But the stronger he worked, the quieter that voice became. He had spent years internalizing failures, but now he was on the verge of reclaiming that narrative. "Focus, Jake. One would never rush art," he reminded himself, allowing determination to lace through his veins. The intricacies of the engine demanded patience. If he rushed, he could ruin everything. In that moment, he discovered a hidden competency, the ability to balance perseverance with vulnerability. It was okay not to have all the answers instantly. As the night grew deeper, he wiped the sweat from his brow. The atmosphere in the garage buzzed with intense anticipation, each flicker of his light casting shadows that danced around him. Within the darkness, he felt a fire stoke inside. This task challenged not just his technical skills, but his mental resolve. The Chevy belonged to him now, and with it he carried the heavy weight of his aspirations that began to solidify into a tangible force. To keep himself grounded, he began to listen to the older models' stories. He imagined their lives and challenges as they slid through the life cycle of car parts. Each had come to him in a state of despair, yet through effort and attention, they had found new life. Just as he sought respite in the process, these vehicles did as well. The clock approached midnight when he found himself nearing completion. His hands trembled slightly from fatigue, but melancholic gratification wrapped around him like a warm embrace. Just as he completed the final adjustments, the engine beckoned for life. He inserted the key, palms sweaty and heart racing, and turned it.
A guttural roar erupted from within. The sound vibrated through his bones. Triumph replaced trepidation in that sonic wave, pushing aside each self-doubt that had haunted him. Yet something lingered as a whisper behind the eclipsing sound of victory. Ethan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes glinting with something unreadable. The smirk was gone, replaced by contemplative scrutiny. "Not bad, Jake, but can you handle the next challenge?" The question hung in the air, thick with implications. Would Ethan throw down another gauntlet? Jake's heartbeat quickened, knowing this could mean an even steeper climb that demanded every ounce of courage he had cultivated. For a fleeting moment he remembered the warm embrace of potential and passion against disdain's chill. Would he dare to explore this new challenge again? Caught between what lay ahead and the anxiety of repeating his past, Jake's gaze flickered back to the Chevy, both wreckage and revival. If he pushed further, could he earn a victory that transcended just the mechanical? The answer danced tantalizingly close, but how much more was he willing to risk? The next step loomed, steeped in adrenaline and uncertainty. The world around him quieted as the moment of choice became clearer. An imminent confrontation awaited, and he was prepared to face it head-on. The metallic scent of engine oil lingered in the air as Jake sat staring at Ethan, whose expression mirrored unspoken challenges. The Chevy's rumble faded into background noise as the weight of the moment pressed down on him. What exactly did Ethan mean by the next challenge? There was always a cost to the risks he took. He'd learned that far too well. "Are you prepared to reinvent yourself, Jake?" Ethan's voice sliced through the heavy air, thick with his expectations. "What if I told you there's a car that's a real project, a gamble that could change everything for you?" Jake felt the blood rushing in his ears. Change had always been a double-edged sword for him. Why did the potential for transformation taunt him with excitement and dread? He had clawed his way up from self-doubt with the Chevy, and yet now here was Ethan, offering him a chance cloaked in uncertainty. "Tell me more," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. He wasn't about to back down. The image of the Chevy became a protective shroud, even as it transformed into a symbol of his burgeoning determination. Ethan leaned closer, engaging him with a gravity reserved for serious discussions. "This new car is something else. It's a vintage Ferrari, seen better days, but the engine holds stories of its own. I'm betting on your talent this time, not that you can just fix it, but that you can elevate it, breathe life back into it." The air caught in Jake's throat, stifling his instinct to balk at the overwhelming enormity of the project. A Ferrari,
This was worlds apart from the Chevy.
The stakes had shifted, spinning into something that invoked the ghosts of inadequacy he fought so hard to silence. "What's the catch?" Jake asked, skepticism weaving its way into his determination. Nothing in life came without a price, especially when it involved something that resonated deeply with his aspirations. "It's simple," Ethan returned, unwavering. "If you succeed, I'll match your hard work not just with money, but with mentorship, unlocked access to skills you can't imagine, a chance at a place in my circle. If you fail," he paused, letting the gravity of the unspoken consequences thrum between them. "Keep your ambitions grounded and walk away from this. No shame in knowing your limits." The challenge dangled before Jake, a glittering carrot ripe for plucking. Could he leverage his recent success into greater achievements? The thought sent a thrill down his spine. This could be the turning point he had envisioned since he first turned a wrench. But it could also lead to further disillusionment and a descent into past failures. "I accept," he affirmed, the words spilling from his mouth like a prayer. The weight of his choice settled over him, igniting an aggressive resolve within. Balancing on the precipice of fear and ambition, he decided now would be the moment to challenge not only his skills, but his very identity. With Ethan reluctantly nodding, Jake took a breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. As the night continued, he envisioned the juxtaposition he would soon face, the undercarriage of a Ferrari contrasted with a vision of who he hoped to become. There would be late nights in the garage, fabricating solutions out of thin air, immersing himself in both the allure and intimidation of this project. "Let's see if you truly can handle the pressure, Jake," Ethan's parting shot echoed in his mind, pushing him further into a state of anticipation tinged with dread. What other hidden capabilities would he discover in himself? Jake wiped sweat from his brow, refocusing on his goal. Uncertainty simmered beneath the surface, but it was a storm he was willing to ride. He had reclaimed part of his narrative with the Chevy, but now he would face the most formidable challenge yet. Would he rise to meet it, or would this gamble reveal the fragility of his newfound vigor? The engine of the Ferrari awaited, both a redemption and a test. The moment to confront his fears approached, a new revival more profound than before. But even as he noted his determination, beneath it, shadows of doubt flickered, whispering insidiously to him. What if he failed again? Without answers, Jake steeled himself for the next stage of his journey as he stood before the very thing that could either define him or leave him in ruins. What would he find within this next challenge? Jake could only hope it was something greater than the shadows of his past.
The garage engulfed Jake in shadows as he returned the next day, propelled not just by ambition, but by a faint pulse of fear that surged through him. The Ferrari loomed before him, an artifact of splendor cloaked in the dust of oblivion. This wasn't merely a vehicle, it was a haunted promise of both success and failure, begging him to unravel its secrets. Jake took a breath, refusing to let anxiety dictate his movements. He ran his fingers along the sleek body, noting every crease and imperfection as if they were his own emotional scars. Grime had settled in the crevices, a reflection of the engine's slumber. He needed to awaken it, but first he had to silence the inner voice that echoed doubts with every reminder of his worth. What if he lacked the skill? What if Ethan's faith was misplaced? These questions clawed at him, a testament to his infallible tendency towards self-sabotage. But today felt different. There was a fresh spark in the air, an electric current of potential. If anything, the shadows from yesterday's fears were now a backdrop against which he could showcase his resolve. With his tools laid out before him, Jake began to dissect the Ferrari's mysteries piece by piece. The engine compartment invited him into a world far removed from his Chevy. Every screw and bolt hummed with stories of Italian ingenuity. The task required not just technique, but a vision that transcended mere repair. It demanded transformation. Jake was captivated, fueled by the thrill of the unknown. As hours drifted by, he felt a familiar rhythm driving him, tension and release, a dance with metal and machinery. With each successful adjustment, he discovered pockets of confidence tingling beneath his skin. A quick check of the fuel lines turned up a blockage, which he expertly cleared. The satisfaction spread through him, proving he was capable of hunting down even the most elusive of faults. But beneath his triumph, Jake grappled with an unsettling truth. The longer he spent alone with the Ferrari, the more he sensed that this project was a reflection of himself. Issues enveloped in greatness, yearning for revival. If he could breathe life back into this engine, would it mean he could do the same for his turbulent thoughts? Focus, he whispered to himself, as he tightened a bolt to secure a part that had almost given way.
But the exhilaration of the moment quickly spiraled into self-doubt again. A clanking sound echoed from the depths of the Ferrari, stirring a quiver of apprehension through his core. Had he overlooked something crucial? The idea of failure shrouded the exhilaration of progress, threatening to pull him back into the pit of despair he had climbed out of with the Chevy. Determined not to be rattled, Jake kneeled by the Ferrari's undercarriage and began examining the transmission. What he sought was clarity through labor, a clarity that would shield him from the noise of his insecurities.
Elation mixed with tension as he unraveled more parts, one step forward toward actualizing that promise Ethan dangled before him. It was then, amidst the complexities of metal and machinery, that something within Jake clicked. The rhythms and motions began to mirror his passions, a dance of discovery with the tools speaking a language he now understood. They became extensions of his own struggles, and with that echoing realization, a fleeting seed of belief was planted. He was defining his own capabilities. Yet lurking underneath the surface of his progress was an ever-present question. What if it wasn't enough to simply rebuild the Ferrari? He needed to prove himself not just to Ethan, but to the specters of his past that haunted him still. Each bolt tightened was a small victory. Each moment held the weight of impending judgment if he faltered. As dusk settled in, casting an orange glow through the garage, the thought flickered ominously. How far was he willing to go to confront the realities of his newfound ambition? In this relentless quest to restore the Ferrari, the shadows of failure hovered persistently. Would overcoming the challenge ahead merely be an illusion of success, or could his diligence pave the way for a far more profound metamorphosis? Jake found himself standing on the edge of a precipice. There was potential everywhere, both in the Ferrari and within himself. But first, he'd need to confront the inevitable. There would come a moment of truth that demanded everything he had. Would the next step lead him closer to the redemption he craved, or would the stakes unravel all he struggled to build? Tomorrow, he decided, he would go deeper. Now it was about confronting the heart of the challenge, and he sensed the time had come to face not just the Ferrari's engine, but the engine of his own fears. The following morning greeted Jake with a heavy fog that clung to everything, cloaking the world in a muted stillness. Within the garage, the Ferrari awaited him like an unresolved riddle, each potential fix hanging tantalizingly in the air. The weight of urgency coursed through him. He realized he was no longer simply a novice tinkering with cars. He was a soul searching for validation amidst the remnants of his former self. Setting to work, he shifted his mindset. Each piece he removed felt like shedding layers of self-doubt, a cathartic rebirth in the pursuit of excellence. Today wasn't just about fixing the Ferrari, it was about dismantling the fortress of uncertainty that had long encased his ambitions. The first task was to examine the oil pan. He had learned that even the smallest oversight could lead to catastrophic failure, and in many ways that mirrored his life. As his hand submerged into the dark, viscous fluid, an unsettling reflection occurred. Wasn't he also grappling with his own emotional muck, each drop a representation of fears he had allowed to fester? The oil had to be drained so the engine could start anew, and perhaps he too needed to purge himself of the toxic beliefs that had clung stubbornly to him. Jake's mind flashed back to a moment in high school, standing before the class during a presentation, tongue-tied and humiliated as laughter erupted around him. He had learned to shield himself behind indifference, an armor that kept vulnerability at bay, but also stifled growth. Now, in the presence of this magnificent machine, a flicker of resolve ignited. He vowed not to shy away from his past or the potential of his future. He paused, feeling the weight of each past moment pressing into him. The Ferrari was transformative. It demanded not just skill, but commitment, the very characteristics he yearned to embody. With renewed determination, he dive-bombed deeper into the work, removing the old oil filter. As it slipped from his fingers, he felt something shift, a release, a letting go of old fears that tightened in his gut like the filter itself. Now he couldn't afford to be hesitant. His goal loomed larger than self-doubt. Guided by the tension of his thoughts and a growing urgency, Jake descended into mechanical intricacies he had once feared. Each tightened bolt felt like an exclamation mark, fueling his growing belief in his abilities. The sound of tools clattering against one another became a ritual, a symphony of progress drawing him closer to his fleeting aspirations. Lunchtime crept in with insidious stealth, caught up in the cacophony of machinery. Ignoring his stomach's growling pleas, he pressed on. The garage transformed around him, morphing from a shadowy cocoon into a vibrant workshop buzzing with possibility.
But it wasn't just mechanical progress. This day writhed with enlightenment. He caught himself entering a trance-like state where everything faded, the noise of his insecurities, the pain of past failures. In its place was a newfound clarity. The Ferrari and its engine were no longer an intimidating frontier, but a canvas awaiting his artistry. Realizing he bridged the gap between ambition and execution, he lifted his head, catching a glimpse of his reflection in a rusted tool. The boy lost in self-doubt had started to fade, replaced by a burgeoning man whose vision had begun to crystallize. Yet, as the day lengthened into twilight, the shadows of doubt re-emerged. Thoughts of Ethan's expectations flooded back. What if he disappointed him? What if he failed to meet the high stakes that this Ferrari represented? Each doubt sprouted within the crevices of his psyche, threatening to dismantle the newly gained momentum. Sweat trickled down his neck as he readied himself for what lay ahead. His hands buzzed with adrenaline as he took a deep breath. This was bigger than just a mechanical fix. This was the moment he had to assert his worth, not just through the car, but through his actions and choices.
With this fire ignited within him, he decided it was time to challenge himself further. He dared to touch what had long remained untouched. What would happen when he pushed beyond his comfort zone? Could he dare to confront the raw mechanism of his fragile psyche alongside the stark reality of the Ferrari's function? He steeled himself, realizing the stakes were far higher than he had initially perceived. Was he ready to facilitate a connection that could prove to be both perilous and enlightening? The next step beckoned, and there was no turning back. Would he rise through the ashes of his doubts once and for all, or would life's specters render him incomplete? With a firm resolve, Jake prepared for the next challenge, and as he gripped the wrench, the next chapter of his transformation awaited. Jake gripped the wrench tightly, feeling the cool metal mold into the contours of his palm. He could hardly grasp the enormity of what lay before him, not just the Ferrari's sleek design and complex machinery, but the monumental task of overcoming his own limitations. As he adjusted his stance, his mind raced toward the implications of a deeper challenge. This was about proving himself, not only to Ethan, but to himself. He latched on to the next goal, the ignition system. For a moment, the twisted pathways of wires and connectors appeared daunting, almost as tangled as the thoughts weaving through his mind. Could he actually unravel it all, just as he had begun to confront his own insecurities? With every removed component, he imagined stripping away yet another layer of self-doubt. Each screw turned became an affirmation that he was more than the kid who had been laughed at long ago. Focusing intently on the task, Jake began to trace the wiring from the spark plugs to the ignition coil. It felt eerily symbolic. He was igniting something within himself, tapping into a drive that had been dormant for too long. His hands moved instinctively, a rhythm building as confidence surged. Each time he connected a wire, it felt like reconnecting a fragment of his own fractured identity. But then doubt slithered in, whispering that he might fail. What if the ignition system was irreparable, that the fix would fail during the big reveal? Jake swallowed hard, refocusing on the tangible work at hand. He began to visualize the end result, the possibilities queuing in his mind like the cars racing along the highway. His future was before him, but he had to press on. Underneath the guise of this mechanical conflict, Jake found a different kind of pressure brewing, a moral dilemma. Could he impose this daunting task onto himself and risk being overwhelmed, or was there strength in bearing the weight of expectations? He envisioned Ethan's face, the potential admiration mingling with the apprehension of disappointment. Could he truly prove to not just himself but also the world his worth in this moment?
The sound of metal clashing sent a burst of adrenaline coursing through him. His pulse quickened. Suddenly, an idea sparked. What if by fixing the ignition system, he didn't just repair the car, but unlocked a piece of himself that long remained dormant? What if he transformed his past failures into the fuel for his triumph? With renewed urgency, Jake dove deeper. He recalled mechanics he would normally shy away from, every flick of his wrist replaced with a determination to confront complexities. Each sensitive connection made began to signify a reconciliation with the fears he had endured for years. But just as he felt the tide of empowerment rising within, another wave crashed over him. Ethan's investment was vast. $1 million bet loomed over him like an executioner's axe, a threat that spoke louder than any doubt. The panic tightened in his chest, a fierce battle of logical reasoning against crippling concern. Would he risk losing not only the Ferrari, but the trust Ethan had begun to build in him? Scenarios flashed through his mind, each more dire than the last. What if this car wasn't merely a job, it was a proving ground for Jake himself, a test of character and perseverance? He noticed his hands trembling now, and he took a step back, forcing himself to breathe. This wasn't merely about mechanics, it was about faith, first in himself, and then in the process he had begun. With a deep breath, he acknowledged the necessity of moving through fear instead of retreating into old patterns. Resuming work, he tightened one last bolt on the ignition system, a cathartic finality echoing in his mind. The shadows of his doubts loomed still, but now they were joined by something else, resolve, the very ember of possibility igniting at his core. As he stepped back to evaluate the work, he caught his reflection once more in a nearby tool. The boy who had hesitated stood in contrast to a man building himself anew, layer by layer. The stakes had never been higher, but so had the desire to transcend his limits. Jake felt the shift inside him as he prepared for the moment of truth. Would the Ferrari roar to life as a testament to his newfound prowess, or would it sputter, a reminder of everything he feared? As he flicked the ignition switch, anticipation crackled in the air. The moment approached, and reality hung on the edge of uncertainty. What awaited him next was not just an engine roar, but the potential crescendo of his own awakened spirit. Jake's finger hovered over the ignition switch, tension coiling in his stomach. This wasn't just about the rumble of an engine, it was the sound of potential fulfillment, a reckoning of everything he had felt inadequate to achieve. With a quick twist, he engaged the switch. The sound reverberated in his chest, a sputter, and then a breathy cough from the engine. Fear flickered like an unsteady flame, but he refused to be extinguished by it.
He toggled the switch again, feeling the weight of Ethan's gaze upon him, the promise of trust tethered to this moment. Come on, he whispered, willing the ignition system into action, as if his voice could coax life back into the machine. But the engine faltered, stubbornly denying his yearning for closure. This was it. The possibility of failure loomed larger than ever. A frigid wave of panic washed over him. The dream, his self-worth, and his future seemed entangled within the confines of that unyielding vehicle. Jake stepped back, collecting himself as he processed what had just happened. The failure was undeniable, and the whispers of self-doubt crept in, curling around his mind like smoke. Was he fallible? Had he overstepped again, convinced himself he could achieve what others had said was impossible? The laughter of his past classmates echoed in the back of his mind. You'll never amount to anything. He almost shrank under their invisible weight, but in that moment, he felt the stirrings of something else. Taking a deep breath, he recognized a vital truth. This moment didn't define him. Failing at the ignition didn't quantify his worth or diminish his efforts. He was not simply an extension of this car or anyone's expectation. He was evolving, struggling, striving to become more than what others had so casually dismissed. Jake's resolve flared within him like a beacon. The mechanics of the ignition system became a puzzle to decipher rather than a dead end. He grabbed his tools again, methodically retracing his steps, refusing to succumb to despair. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, he engaged with the challenge. Each click of the wrench was met with his inner dialogue. What if the wiring was switched? Had he misdiagnosed the issue? As he worked, he channeled the moral dilemma festering in his mind. He could view this challenge as a burden or an opportunity. The choice was his. With newfound clarity, he recalled Ethan's words about innovation and perseverance. Maybe what mattered most wasn't simply the victory in front of him, but the process behind it. His identity could interlace within this mechanical labyrinth, a demonstration of resilience. Reconfiguring the wires, he employed logic and intuition, rejecting the notion of chaos that initially paralyzed him. He visualized each spark and connection, a step closer to awakening the beast of speed within the Ferrari. As he adjusted connections, he felt his trepidation swap roles with fervor. He was not just restoring a car, he was reclaiming himself bit by bit. Then came a click. Simple, definitive, yet it shook him to his core. The ignition switch was engaged again. Jake waited, his breath caught in his throat. The engine roared to life with a deep, resonant growl that vibrated through the garage, full, unapologetic, and monumental. The sound washed over him like a warm wave, dissolving the last remnants of doubt. This wasn't just about mechanical success. It was about self-acceptance and growth. Moving back, he admired the car, which now hummed like a fierce ally. The boy who hesitated had vanished, replaced by someone capable of metamorphosis. But even in triumph, a flicker of anxiety lingered. What would Ethan say? Would he truly understand the significance of this moment? And what if the gamble was more than just a bet on the car? Was it a wager on their evolving relationship?
Jake wasn't merely caught between the praise he craved and the risk of judgment. This was also about facing the man who had placed so much faith in him. The stakes had sharpened beyond just the car. Now they teetered precariously between transformation and acceptance. As he prepared to share his victory, the door swung open, revealing Ethan with a look of anticipation that made Jake's heart race anew. This was a turning point not only for the Ferrari, but for the man he longed to be. What awaited him in that exchange of gazes might change everything. Jake stood at the threshold of uncertainty as he faced Ethan, the roar of the Ferrari's engine still echoing through the garage like a victorious anthem. He had conquered the ignition system, an empowering feat that redefined his capabilities as both a mechanic and a man. The worries of yesterday, the doubts that had once choked his resolve, melted into the background, overshadowed by the brilliance of this moment of achievement. Ethan stepped closer, a mix of curiosity and disbelief playing across his sharply defined features. The bet had felt insurmountable, yet here Jake stood, tremors of uncertainty quieted by the reverberated strength of the Ferrari. "You actually did it," Ethan stated, his tone holding an uncharacteristic hint of grudging admiration. It wasn't just a statement about the car, it was validation of everything Jake had strived for in this work. "Yes, I did," Jake replied, his voice steady and resolute, no longer a mere reflection of his previous insecurities, but a resounding affirmation of self-worth. The flames of confidence sparked within him, igniting a realization that transcended the mechanical. He had stepped out from beneath the weight of others' expectations to claim his legacy. A silence briefly hovered between them, a moment charged with possibility. Rather than merely glossing over the challenge, Jake realized that he had not just repaired a mechanical marvel, but had also repaired the fragmented pieces of himself. "This Ferrari is like me," he gestured at the engine, full of potential underneath the surface. It sounded bold, yet so genuine, and he felt a new certainty swell within him. Ethan crossed his arms, a challenge concealed in a smirk. "Okay, Jake, so what's next then?" The lilt in Ethan's voice gave away a hint of playful competition, but Jake felt a shift in their dynamic, as if the stakes had changed fundamentally. "Well," Jake considered, savoring the moment, "I don't just want to fix cars anymore. I want to learn from them, understand their stories." The sincerity in his words pulsated through the air. This isn't just about the mechanics anymore. It's about the craftsmanship. It's about heritage, too. Ethan raised an eyebrow, impressed and intrigued. "You think you can handle the pressure of not just working on top-notch cars, but innovating the future of them?" "Absolutely," Jake replied, a mixture of determination and excitement ringing true. The fear that moments before had threatened to dim his spirit was now a mere whisper. "If you're offering mentorship, I won't let you down. I want to not just make a mark, but redefine what it means to be a mechanic in this town." Those words felt monumental, sparking an awareness of purpose that had laid dormant for too long. Jake felt more than just pride in his mechanical skills. He was reclaiming his narrative, writing each chapter with passion. The crowd of onlookers beyond the garage had borne witness to his failures, but now they would witness his transformation. Ethan's smirk softened, revealing a sense of respect. "You've got guts, Jake. Let's see if you can take that ambition and turn it into something real. There's a world out there that could use a fresh perspective. You could redefine skilled trades as we know them." With those words, Jake felt the pressure shift. No longer was he merely fighting to prove his worth. He was invited to shape a future he had envisioned for himself. The transformation from a mechanic struggling under the weight of self-doubt to an innovator brimming with purpose and clarity was complete. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a glow through the garage, Jake reflected on the journey he had undertaken. This hadn't just been about fixing a car or winning a bet. It was about digging deep and unearthing the very essence of who he was meant to be. The shadows of his past would never fully vanish, but they would no longer dictate him. Jake took a deep breath, allowing satisfaction to wash over him. He had achieved not only the restoration of an engine, but had rebuilt his own spirit alongside it. He was prepared for the next challenge, the next project that would push him further. "Let's get started then," he said confidently, his heart thrumming with purpose as he stepped forward, ready to tackle whatever lay ahead. This was not merely the end of one journey, it was the beginning of the life he had always aspired to live.